Welcome to the Reconciliation Conversation. We want this podcast to be a space where we can expose hate, encourage love, equip for healthy reconciliation, and emphasize unity so that all people can know their value together as one. Welcome to another episode of the Reconciliation Conversation. We're thankful that you've joined us today. I'm excited for our guest today. We actually have the opportunity to join us today in the conversation, former Governor Jeb Bush, the 43rd governor of the state of Florida. He served from 1999 to 2007. He was actually the third Republican elected to the state's highest office there, and the first Republican in the state's history to be reelected. During his two terms, Governor Bush championed major reform of government in areas ranging from healthcare and environmental protection to civil service and tax reform. His top priority, though, was to overhaul the state's educational system. Today, Florida actually remains a national leader in education and is one of the only states in the nation to significantly narrow the achievement gap. Governor Bush maintains his passion for improving the quality of education for students across the country by serving as the chairman of the Foundation for Excellence in Education, a national nonprofit education reform organization that he founded that we'll talk about a little bit later. And he founded that to transform education here in America. He is currently living in Miami with his wife, Columba. And we actually were talking earlier today. He's celebrating the birth of another grandchild. So we're excited that he decided to join us in on the reconciliation conversation today. Governor Bush, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic, Derrick. Looking forward to our conversation. Jason, nice meeting you as well.
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Well, just to begin, Governor, we'll jump in just to gain some context here. And since what we do here is called the reconciliation conversation, how important would you say is one's educational approach to creating opportunities for reconciliation and reimagine 21st century American future together?
Well, the world we're moving towards requires skills that weren't necessary just 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And yet our education system was designed basically in the early 20th century. It has an agricultural calendar and an industrial model, neither one of which is relevant for this incredibly diverse group of students that for our country to move forward, we have to make sure that every child has a fighting chance. And the building blocks start with how you read.
Yeah.
Kids can't read by the end of third grade. The gaps will grow and grow and grow. Mm-hmm. And it goes beyond that to having high expectations for every kid. So if you start with the premise, and I hope you all appreciate this, that every child is a gift from God, which I believe, then it's up to us to organize ourselves through the so-called education system to make sure that every child reaches their God-given potential. We don't do that. We truly do not do that.
Yeah.
In 1998, I was a candidate. I went to visit, 250 schools. I had pretty provocative views when I ran, and I wanted people to know that I had a heart for this. It wasn't some kind of political game. I truly believe that we needed to transform our education. So I went in the lion's den 250 times. People were a little anxious to see me, to be honest with you. I'll never forget. I was in a back of the high school room. It was a computer lab back when the computers were like the screens were this big and they were green, like palm machine kind of.
Yeah.
And this kid, his name was Santiago, and he was studying for what was an 8th grade level test to graduate from high school. Many states in the country didn't have graduation tests. Ours, we were so proud of it. We had one. It was an 8th grade level test to graduate from 12th grade. And the question was, a baseball game starts at 3, it ends at 4:30. How long is the game? Now, this kid was taking his final chance the next day to pass that test so he could graduate. And he couldn't answer that question. So what in the world are we doing?
Yeah.
How are we going to find common ground when we have young people that don't even get the first step of a quality education? Now, that's improved in Florida and other places in our country, but we still have a long way to go. So I'm passionate about this. And I think the two things that really are the catalysts, there's many other things that need to be done. You need to empower parents to make choices. They need to be informed consumers. They have to have information.
I like that.
Having a say is not just empowering for empowerment's sake. It also engages them in their child's education. And it makes the public schools that traditionally are assigned kids more responsive to the needs of, particularly of low-income families. And you have to have accountability. If you don't measure, you really don't care. And you can excuse away. I mean, now we're in this period of tremendous strife in our country of privilege versus people, not accessing opportunity. And this is the time to have a conversation of why is it that we have a K-12 system, particularly, where you have haves and you have have-nots.
Yeah.
So accountability, particularly for students that are struggling, particularly low-income kids, is essential. But those are the two pillars: choice for parents and accountability. And in Florida, we've embraced that with a passion and had some pretty good results.
That's good. That's good. We appreciate you answering that, Governor.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you hit it right there, talking about accountability. I mean, I know whether it's reconciliation or education and many other things, staying local focused, staying state and local focused has been a passion of yours. And we agree. I think anything that's going to really have a cultural shift or effect has to have that grassroots element. It can't just be handed down. And so what's been rewarding, but what's also been difficult as you've worked with policymakers, lawmakers, teachers on that local and state level, because if that's really where the battle is, right, we've got to give energy to it. What's been great and what's been tough about that?
Well, the partisanship, hyper politicization of things now, it's kind of creeped little by little more and more into policy world, and it's basically frozen. There hasn't been the kind of momentum that I had hoped, say, a decade ago, because education's been put into the hyper-partisan meat grinder. That's a problem. I think education should be a national effort. It should be a national calling. It should be a national priority, but it needs to be delivered locally. It can't be, there's no one size fits all in America. We're like,
that's right.
We're the Baskin Robbins of life. We have thousands of flavors. And America at its best is a country that has a set of shared values, which have eroded, I think, sadly, and they can be rebuilt better locally than they can nationally. A set of shared values that with a diverse population creates, it's like a catalytic converter for a lot of good things happening. So I'm all into reconciliation, which is why I'm delighted to be with you guys. And I'm all into a bottom-up approach to things. We talked about this beforehand. A lot of this is cultural. Our culture changes. People look at our politics and they go, "Man, it's ugly. I don't want to be part of that."
Yeah.
And they kind of disassociate themselves from politics. Well, here's the dirty little secret. Our politics is a mirror image of our culture. It's a lagging indicator. It's not a leading indicator. It reflects our culture, and our culture is more vulgar. It's uglier. It isn't fact-based. It's not as loving and caring as it needs to be. And the good news is that cultural changes happen from the bottom up. The last big cultural change was in the 60s. And that's run out of gas. That's my generation's contribution to our country, and I'd say it was not a good one. But my expectation is that younger people are going to create the next cultural change. I'm heartened by, this may sound a little weird, I'm kind of a nerd about these things. When I think about things, I try to dig deeper. I'm heartened by the Second Great Awakening in our country. It was in the 1830s, where as a result of men mostly migrating west to seek their fame and fortune, there was a breakdown of family life. Small towns were, totally decimated by the fathers leaving. There was a lot of debauchery. Alcoholism rates were like astronomical. And there was the Second Great Awakening was sparked by Presbyterian ministers in Western New York on fire for the Lord that created a change in direction for the country. And the net result was it was the foundation for the abolitionist movement. It was the foundation for the prohibition movement, believe it or not, that happened far later. The women's suffrage movement, the whole progressive agenda was spawned by this awakening that changed our culture, which meant our way of life and our politics changed as well.
Yeah.
That's my prayer. My hope and prayer is that we will have something similar. I'm not sure how it plays out. I'm not smart enough to look into the future, but it's going to happen at the local. It's going to happen in a bottom-up way, not top-down.
That's so good. And it's interesting because of some of my buddies in leadership, whether in church domain or just other types of cultural domains, they have a centerpiece in New York. So it's interesting that the second great awakening, came out of that area, and these guys are all in that area. And it's interesting because I'm hearing similarly to what you just said from them, that kind of awakening of cultural shift, they feel like they're seeing, sparks of it and some fruit and signs of it. And so that's hopeful. I hope that is to come. And maybe we'll see, as you said, the cycle repeat. So
yeah,
good.
And I believe that it can happen. It should happen. The reality is, like, building off what you just said, Jason, there are people who are having the conversation. There are people that are beginning to see, like, man, there's so much more that we can do. And, Governor, I'm in that generation, that the younger generation, if you will, that, like, man, we can speak into things. We can, seek to be a part of that, progressive movement of, calling out what's not right, speaking into, issues of education and reform as a whole. We're next up, if you will. And I do believe, man, you put the right people in place, they're having the right conversations, and it could happen. It could truly happen.
I totally agree. I think one of the keys to reconciliation, the keys to rejuvenation, is reminding us. We need to remind ourselves of what it is to be an American, what are our shared values. Warts and all. Look, we're not a perfect nation, which is probably the best nation ever created under God's, watchful eye here. But we've got a long way to go. We've got problems, but
no doubt,
it's impossible to fix things if we have a totally different set of values for one group and the other. And then the internet plays a pretty destructive role, where you can create your own alternative set of facts. Come on, man. I mean, that's kind of like 1984 talk.
Yeah.
We need to get beyond that. I'll never forget when I was, I'm long gone out of politics, but when I was in politics, there were rewards for the Nixon to China moments. There were the rewards for finding someone who didn't look like me, who didn't agree with me on many things, but agreed with me on this thing, to share the podium, basically, to launch an initiative, to advocate. There were rewards for that. Now it's seldom done.
Yeah.
And that's because there's this big, deep divide. And if we're going to begin to fix problems, you have to assume that someone who disagrees with you isn't a bad person. They just may be wrong on that particular subject.
Yeah.
They're as patriotic as you are. Man, you don't get a sense of that when you're watching these conventions.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, I appreciate you sharing that, Governor. Well, so you've consistently you've pushed for higher educational standards, coupled with greater choice. And obviously, this is our first time meeting each other. But my story actually includes the chance to be educated in a completely different environment than the one that I grew up in, that I lived in. Can you talk about why you think providing for parents who might need to spend money for a better educational opportunity for their child is so significant, as well as, probably the best way to go about that?
Well, first of all, if you're empowering parents, you're effectively child-centered, student-centered rather than adult-centered and focused on a system. The system is irrelevant to me. It's, can we make sure a child gets a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time and does so successively? And whether it's a private school, a not-for-profit charter school, a public school choice option, or financial support for kids with learning disabilities, or the Florida virtual school that our friend Julie Young was the godmother of, that was the largest of its kind, still continues to provide quality education. All of those choices make all schools get better. That's the beauty of this is, I guess in education, where we kind of exempt common sense thinking. That would be totally easy to understand if you're in a setting where you're finding you're trying to buy a service or a product. If there's competition, the prices go down, the quality goes up. The same applies in education. But we so focus on the economic interest of the adults, we kind of skip over that part. So I'm proud of the fact that Florida has the first, the second, the third statewide voucher programs. I'm proud of the fact that we had the largest virtual school. I'm proud of the fact that there is a thriving homeschool community in Florida. I'm proud of the fact that we now have public school choice across district lines. I'm proud of the fact that we have a robust charter school offering. And here's the end result. With accountability and empowering parents to have choices they otherwise wouldn't have, our low-income students are in the top 5 of the country. When I started on our journey, 1998, Florida was 29th out of 31 states that administered the so-called NAEP test, Nation's Report Card. We whispered, I forgot which state was below us, but most people who whispered, thank God for Florida, because we were 50th out of 50 on graduation rate. 50% of kids graduated from high school.
My goodness.
And then the net result in 10 years' time was that we were 6th out of 50 in the 4th grade reading test 10 years later.
Wow.
African-American kids, Hispanic kids, kids with learning disabilities, low-income kids, all were in the top 5.
Yeah.
Low-income Hispanic kids do better than the California average on the 4th grade reading test.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not, our kids are, living in Florida, of course, they're brilliant. I love my state, but they're not, every kid has the ability to do it. The system around them has to change to make sure that they can rise up. And we have evidence on the path forward, but it is very political. People are threatened by these kind of changes because it challenges their economic interests.
Yeah. So let's build off that then, Governor. Like, what educational reform needs to actually happen in order to ensure that students from those more impoverished areas have access to these things, have access to STEM and to STEAM education, so that they can, begin to imagine themselves in a job one day that otherwise they might not have imagined otherwise in the system that they're in?
Sure. Well, first, if you give parents power, particularly low-income parents, the power to choose, they can choose a school that may not have the STEM or STEAM programs that their kids, their neighborhood schools have. But the other thing that you can do is to say they should have it. Why do we assume that low-income kids shouldn't have access to high-quality education? It is the ultimate form of the soft bigotry of low expectations. So, as I said, I'm kind of a nerd ball as it relates to data. I asked the following question. We grade schools A through F in Florida. Very controversial, apparently, but everybody knew an A is better than an F. And we rewarded schools with extra money, $100 per kids, if they showed improvement. So I asked the following question. How many kids in D and F high schools take AP classes? How many take the practice SAT, which is the leading indicator of whether you're ready to go to college in 10th grade? 15% of kids took the practice SAT in the D and F schools, and 85% took them in the A and B schools. So what did we do? We paid for every kid in the state in 10th grade to take the practice SAT.
Yeah.
As a state priority. I asked how many AP teachers are there in the DNF schools, and it was a fraction of what it was in the A and B schools. So what did we do? We created the first in the nation partnership with the College Board, where we train teachers and bonus them when their students pass the AP, and we've seen an explosion of low-income kids, triple-digit increases taking and passing the AP classes. You can't just sit on the sidelines and talk about it or excuse it away. There's a growing trend now just to say, look, life's not fair, and there's systemic things that we can't overcome. We have to accept it. And I reject that out of hand, because that dooms the possibilities of people being able to rise up and to be successful. We have to have lofty expectations for everyone and then have the resources to back it up.
Man, that's good.
People think that I'm trying to destroy public education, and what I see are huge swaths of our society being limited in their potential, and it breaks my heart. And people should be marching in the streets about this. I'm really excited and I'm a huge NBA. I love the bubble.
Oh, it's been so great, Governor. My goodness.
They actually win this thing. They're phenomenal.
Surprisingly.
So I love the fact that they, I don't know how this happened, but they have education reform as one of the 20 different things you can put on the back of your jersey. And there are quite a few of the players that have a heart for this and are saying we need to have education reform, and I'm totally with them.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So how do we whisper to our state officials like, hey, these are things that we need to think about? And not only that, it's like we've got the data, the stats here, in a particular state that we can point to.
Well, there's good things going on. The state that has had the greatest gains in learning on this nation's report card in the last 4 years is Mississippi.
Okay.
Embraced many of the early childhood reading initiatives that we believe are important, ending social promotion, empowering low-income families for more choices. Mississippi's had some lights-out progress. Man. So it can happen for sure. I think somehow we got to take it out of the political realm and make this a justice issue that is powerful and where you could imagine people on the left and right coming together, say, okay, the adults have had their way here for a long while. Maybe we should focus on how do we make sure teachers are trained, and how do we empower parents to help make sure children learn?
Yeah. And that speaks to what you were saying earlier, right? Well, first off, I agree. We should see this as a justice, not political.
Yes.
But then it goes to what you were saying earlier, like, man, we could be on two different sides of the spectrum, but have the thing that we agree on and work towards that end. The next generation that's coming up, man, let's come alongside to see them get to a spot where they can excel, where they can maybe go back into the areas where they're coming from and show and, seek change in their community that, they may not have had when they were coming up, right?
So here's an interesting fact now based on 20 years of experience. There's now a constituency for parental choice for empowering parents. And it's hard to imagine that someone's going to come in and a new governor, new legislature come and take it away. The programs that I described to you disproportionately help low-income communities, but they also disproportionately help Hispanic and African-American churches. Because you have universal pre-K in Florida, you have the corporate tax scholarship program for low-income kids. We now have a voucher program for kids with learning disabilities. And many of these students, their parents, are choosing their church as the source of learning. And so apart from the fact that it's the right thing to do and it makes all schools get better, it also has strengthened important institutions throughout our communities.
Yeah,
I think that's an added benefit that's not talked about much, but because of that, there's now a growing constituency in the legislature and certainly outside politically. Don't take this stuff away, man. This is important for my family and for my community.
It's so good. And I two things. One, that the second one will lead to the next question, but the first one is here in Tennessee, a friend of mine, his name's William, leads a group in Jackson, Tennessee, and that provides basically technology catalytic after school training for high school students. And they've done it so well now. 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, they had one student who didn't even plan on going to college. But because that person, he went through the training program, reimagined his future, thinking he could have a technology job, and got a full scholarship to Vanderbilt to study that. And then another student the next year, same thing. She had never imagined going even to college, much less like outside of West Tennessee, but much less to study for a technology job. And that student ended up getting a full scholarship to Howard to study that. And so, it's great stories, like you're saying, when justice, politics, policymaking, education, choice, empowering families, when it all comes together, you start seeing those kind of incredible stories result. And I love that. And that leads to this next question, but I'll pause because you may want to comment on that, what I just said.
The skills gap in our country is one of the great opportunities to deal with the economic justice issues that we're facing. there's a positive agenda that would be embraced by a lot of people if we focused on education attainment. And then, the aspiration ought to be that every child garners a high school diploma that means that you actually are college ready and or career ready.
Yeah.
It ought to be both. And we don't come close to doing that. 60% of all entering freshmen in our community college system have to retake high school reading and high school math. Increasing numbers of kids going to our public universities, our four-year universities, are required to take remediation. Our graduation rate has gone every year way up. It's like 86, 87% right now, but it's really not a valuable piece of paper if you're not college ready and or career ready. So let me put it this way. If you were starting from scratch, this is a great way to think about things. The work you're doing in reconciliation certainly would apply to this, and anything else really. If you started with the question, if we weren't doing it this way, how would we do it?
Yeah.
We wouldn't have the system we have today.
No.
And it would have a immersed in our learning. First of all, you would make sure the kids are 4-year-olds are beginning the journey of learning, not waiting till kindergarten, and then make it literacy based and have a gate at the end of 3rd grade that says this kid is a grade level reader, and make sure you put all the resources necessary to make that happen. Without that, it's hard to imagine any of the other things happening. But the end of the journey in high school, there should be more career focus to it. Kids need to be motivated. They can learn around the things they love doing a lot easier than the things they don't. And we should have a flourishing education system with a greater focus on credentials and a focus on making sure our higher education is really meaningful for these kids. I mean, I just read that Google they have a certificate program that offers, without having to get a college degree, they're hiring people that pass this credential program that takes 3 months, I think, or 2 months, at a fraction of the cost to go to college.
Yeah.
And they're offering them jobs at $90,000 a year.
Wow.
Put me in. I'm ready.
Seriously, how can I sign up?
So our systems need to reflect the world we're in. The 21st century is different than the early 1900s when things weren't moving at warp speed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and for someone like you with the diverse background you have in various, avenues of politics and education and things in the economy, I mean, you understand how it all works together. And I mean, for that change to happen, right? Like, we've got to better understand how policy making could potentially change it. And then it does come back to actually being kind enough to each other to have policy making discussions. But when it comes to civics, when it comes to the government, you've always been an advocate of a more robust focus on educating high schoolers to understand how all that works. Talk about why that matters in the midst of this current political climate.
Well, it matters a lot. It passed as prologue, right? I mean, if you don't have a sense of your history, you're going to repeat the mistakes, and that shared identity that's necessary. Look, right now, our political system is like that. Push your opponent down, make yourself look better on both sides, and the gulf between the two is impossible to overcome. That's more of that contagion is more of a DC national political problem, but it's infecting a lot of politics across the country as well.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the bottom-up approach is better, but we have to have a common understanding of our democracy. The numbers, I was a professor at Penn until recently. I was a professor of practice, which meant I got to go on campus and speak to students as a conservative. They don't get to talk to conservatives apparently. So I was the total conservative on campus. I loved it. The kids were brilliant, really engaging time there. But the Annenberg Foundation, Annenberg School of Journalism is there, and they do an annual survey of what people know in our country about our history, about our Constitution. It's just downright scary.
It is.
And people can't name a branch of the government, or they can't name a member of the Supreme Court. They don't know how many members of the Supreme Court there are. On and on it goes. And so I think the Constitution was first of all, it was a reconciliation in that it was a massive compromise.
Mm-hmm.
People had to put aside a lot of differences in order to find common ground, and they did. And it protects, it assumes that we're a self-governing people, because the Bill of Rights particularly protects us from an overbearing government.
Right.
Rather than guarantees rights, it's a totally different system that existed before. And understanding that, and understanding how our society can change, but those fundamentals can be the foundation for the 20th century, the 21st century, I think is hugely important. I was the chairman of the National Constitution Center and fell in love again with the Constitution. It's a phenomenal document, and it's our blueprint. But it's like telling a 16-year-old kid, it's okay to have a bottle of bourbon and keys to the Maserati, even though you don't know how to drive. What good does a blueprint do if you don't know anything about it? You don't know how to drive, but we're letting you go do it. I mean, we need to re-engage. And hopefully, again, the next generation will understand this importance. The other thing I'd say is that it gives you a path forward when you understand the challenges, the fights, how we came together, how we were split apart, how we've dealt with slavery, its impact on it. All these things are really end up making our DNA as a nation. Mm-hmm. We're a nation of immigrants. These things need to be repeated to people and understood. Not all great, some really damaging things for our society. We should have a conversation about it at least.
Yeah.
But if you don't have a set of facts from which to deal with it, how can you talk about it?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, to build on that, so a couple of weeks ago, we had Justin Giboney on. He's overseeing president of the AND campaign, and he said that our two-party system it seems to be crumbling, and he actually argues that party system was never the original intention for our country. And as young leaders are being educated in civics and government, what do you imagine this might inspire them to do to cultivate for more collaborative, effective political structure for the 21st century America?
Yeah, the party system, it's kind of interesting that it's survived. I'm a little surprised, to be honest with you. And now it's hollow. It's a convergence of many special interests. There's not a one organizing principle what it is to be a Democrat, or one organizing principle to be a Republican. And it's not endowed in our Constitution. It exists. It had a useful purpose. But if people self-identify in these groups, and that means that the other group is the enemy, it's just a form. It's just another form of bad news.
Yeah.
So what, look, my experience in politics is there were, let me put it this way, a good year, we'd have 200 bills pass the legislature every year. Mm-hmm. I always wanted about 100, because people shouldn't feel compelled to pass a law every time something happens.
Right.
But a lot of times they're there for 90 days. They got to do things. So 190 to 200 bills. And 90% of them were unanimous votes. Mm-hmm. So the 10% where the fight exists, they could find common ground.
Yeah.
The budget has to pass in every state. It requires a balanced budget. You have to find common ground. Restoring that in Washington would be so helpful, irrespective of the hyperpartisanship. The rule ought to be, look, when you agree, stop fighting. Let's do this. Let's do the parts where we agree first.
Yeah.
And, after we do that, maybe we'll find another one and another one, and pause, reflect on that, learn to understand the other person, have dinner with them. We get back to that.
That'd be nice.
Know who their families are, their background, connect on a human level, and you'd be surprised that you keep finding things that you have common ground with people.
Yeah.
If you skip over all that, man, I mean, I bet you, well, my dad was a congressman. His best friends were, he didn't care if they were Democrat or Republican. He had deep friendships with his colleagues, and their families were very close. Today, it's very seldom will you see Republicans and Democrats actually even socially getting to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember my it was either my grandmother or my history teacher in high school said that, where it's like you'd be surprised that behind the scenes how much of actual friendships that you saw that does not exist here today. I remember hearing that when I was younger, and I was like, well, now that I'm older, how do we get back to that point, right?
I'm not a huge fan of Joe Biden's views on world views, but he's old school in that regard. Yeah. Whenever the government shutdown between the Republicans in Congress and President Obama, like once a year, it seemed like they were about ready to shut down everything. I always felt like Biden going to the Capitol, spending 10 minutes with Mitch McConnell, they'd cut a deal and be done.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
That's the old school way of doing things, and maybe talking about reconciliation. We'll see. I mean, we're in this hyper-partisan world. He might not do that, but if he's elected president, that would be an important thing.
Yeah.
There's some symbolic things that we could do. Public leaders need to lead.
Yeah, that's good.
Let people, if you have a bottom-up approach where people are tired of all this, and you have examples of leadership that is focused on coming together rather than, finding common ground rather than pushing one down to make yourself look better. I mean, the stuff that goes on in politics, I used to get spanked by my mother. I tried to do something like that when I was a kid.
For real.
The crap that we allow to happen is family life. I'm sure we all have that in common. You're learning these habits.
Yeah.
And then you see that people on the national stage basically abandon all the things that we were talking about.
Yeah. You're right.
Well, what you said a while ago, I think is so important. Talking about the blueprint of the Constitution, there's a difference in holding to ideals and holding to ideas, right? And that, to me, that's the heartbeat of understanding the blueprint of the Constitution. It's why we can even have a reconciliation conversation, because we can be honest about the ideal of all men are created equal, but we can be also confessional and honest about where that has not played itself out, right? And the destructiveness of that. And so in that sense, right, like that piece of it is super important. And this next question plays into that with regard to the achievement gap. And there's a quote here, and so I'm going to read it. You've been quoted as saying, the NAEP results indicate that African American and Hispanic students are reading 2 grade levels behind their white peers. And you've already mentioned this. That gap is reflective of a socioeconomic divide when it comes to education, and it's intolerable on a number of levels, morally, socially, economically, end quote. I total honest, I teared up when I was researching for these questions. I teared up when I read that quote of yours. I had not ever read that quote of yours. And it being someone in Florida, I followed you. I paid attention to what you did and appreciated it. I teared up when I read that. And I'm just curious, how do you encourage us in this effort to get that gap eliminated? How do we, and not only that, talk about what needs to happen to eliminate it, but help us put that in the context of the reconciliation conversation as to why that would be so important.
Yeah. So I'm reluctant. I said that, so I'm not taking it back for sure. But it's easy to fall into a trap of saying Hispanic and African American kids achieve less, when in fact it's as much to do of class, of levels of income, of family structure than it is of race or ethnicity.
Right.
Yeah.
They are thriving. In fact, the trap is that African American middle class has grown significantly in the last 40 years. Not every African American is poor. Not every Hispanic is poor. So I wanted to put a footnote into this just to suggest that this has to do with low income families more. To me, that's the important focus. So how do we deal with it? Well, there's lots of policy things that need to be done. One, you put more money in the schools that are taking care of lower income families.
Mm-hmm.
Title I does that, but states ought to have a funding formula that's based on equity as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have a collective bargaining process that doesn't take all of the higher paid teachers out of the low income communities to go to the more affluent communities. You require basically school-based budgeting so that you have a mix of higher paid teachers with beginning teachers. You expand opportunities, as I suggested, with AP classes. Universities need to create partnerships with the big urban core high schools to be able to mentor. You create scholarships for first to go to college, first generation students. It doesn't have to be race-based, but if you're first in your family to go to college, there should be additional financial support because we know the struggles there's a whole suite of reforms that I think are necessary to deal with this inequality that is real.
Yeah.
And then I would say trust parents. You know, I tell the story of Denisha Merriweather, who's a friend of mine now. She was in third grade. She lived in Jacksonville. She had a very tough. She grew up in a really tough circumstance. She flunked third grade twice, and basically was this beautiful child that was lost. I mean, can you imagine the struggle of inadequacy, feeling like you weren't capable of doing things? And her grandmother found out about the corporate tax scholarship program and sent her to a smaller Baptist school in her neighborhood. And she got those years back, and she graduated from high school, and she was the first in her family to graduate from college, and just most recently got a master's of social work at the University of South Florida, and now is working in Washington advocating for parental choice.
Wow.
Had she not had that choice, she would have not been the success that she has. And so if you assume that look, back to the very beginning, that this isn't about us, every child has unique God-given abilities. And it's up to us to organize ourselves around them for the best means by which they can reach that full potential. In not every case are they going to go to a traditional school. What you need to do is to have equitable funding for these options and empower parents to make these choices and have high, lofty expectations for every child. Not one group, one set of expectations for one group and another one for another group. That's what you call racism. That's what you call systemic problems when you have one expectation that is lower for those that need to have more attention given to them. I'm ranting here, but I apologize.
No.
Oh, you're good.
There are school districts in this country when the pandemic hit that said, if we can't educate everybody, we're not going to educate anybody. Oh, come on, man. That is first of all, it is deeply pessimistic. And rather than, have a bias towards action, they did the exact opposite. And who are the kids that are hurt by that? The kids that don't have access to the internet, the kids that don't have any ability to interact with their teachers. The digital divide is another example of a systemic problem in our country. If you have low income, or live in a rural area, you're disproportionately lacking in a device and lacking in internet. Well, instead of saying life's not fair, a great nation rolls up their sleeves together, all of us, and says, we're going to eliminate this. Every child should have the ability to learn at home just as they can learn in school.
And you know, Governor, so I actually heard of some areas, this wasn't obviously nationwide, but I heard of some areas, where companies provided internet to houses. It was either free of charge or lower than, their base package or whatever. And to me, it's like my wife and I kind of looked at each other. It was like, oh, it's doable. We can make this happen. But it's just a matter of seeing the need and responding to it, not looking to grease the pockets.
So you think about it. There are many districts now that are putting in their school buses Wi-Fi and going into the communities and allowing kids to download. And then, as you said, there's a lot of philanthropy giving out devices. So a child could go at a certain period of time, 9:30 in the morning, download their work,
Mm-hmm.
upload their assignments, go back to home and work on it. In the afternoon, go back and do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And get a meal.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is the other part of this. So
That's big.
In the midst of the pandemic, there were school districts that basically surrendered their duties, their obligations. And then we had Elon Musk launching a rocket, the coolest looking rocket in the world, to the space station. Which America do you want? Do you want the guy that is like a little bit crazy, but he's just ingenious and thinks big and acts on it, and as crazy as he might be?
Yeah,
that is America. That's the kind of America that we need to get back to, not the defeatist. Oh, you can't do it. So we're just, God dang, this is so important. The loss of learning, particularly for low-income kids, you can't replace it.
No.
Yeah,
it's not coming
back.
That's
a big deal.
It's not.
Those gaps will go away. And trust me, there'll be people saying it's unfair to have testing at the end of the school year, and if you don't test, you don't measure, you really are expressing a lack of care for whether that child's successful or not. You eliminate accountability particularly for struggling students, you're dooming them.
Yeah. Man, that's good thought. That's good. Well, Governor, we want to protect your time. So as we wrap up, what action steps would you encourage our listeners to take to be the most, so they could effectively participate in educational reform in a reconciling, transformative way?
I'd say first and foremost, if they're parents, make sure their children, make sure you know what the options are that are best for your child. Be engaged, be informed. Sometimes that's easy to do. Sometimes it's hard. But it's, be passionate, be the passionate defender of your child's education. Be involved in your school. There's lots of ways to do that. You get great insights on who the great teachers are, the ones that aren't so great.
Yep.
And then tell your legislators that this should not be a hyper-partisan issue. It's not about labor unions versus management. It's about making sure every kid has a fighting chance by getting a high-quality education. So those would be the ways to do it. And rather than complain about it, act on your beliefs.
Act.
And ultimately, the country is going to thrive if we all have a bias towards action rather than the opposite.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, we appreciate your time, Governor Bush, and as always, we try to let our people know how they can follow our guests. So we know you're on social media at Jeb Bush. You also have a website, jeb.org. You also have another website that you have been a part of as well, excelined.org. Governor Bush, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us on the Reconciliation Conversation. Yes, sir. And for our listeners, go Heat.
Go Heat.
And unless they meet LeBron, and then go Bron.
Well, we had LeBron. It was a good run.
It was a good run, yeah.
Is it too early to say go Warriors? Like, can I get back on that? I'm ready for December 1st is what I'm ready for.
You got the second round draft pick, second pick in the draft, which doesn't seem fair.
It does not. It does not. And as a Knicks fan, seeing that they dropped I think they got like the 8th pick or something, I was like, come on. This is trash. But again, we want to thank you, Governor, and thank you for our listeners. Thank you for joining in on the Reconciliation Conversation. Remember, you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Recon Convo. You can also stay connected with us through our website, reconciliationconversation.com, or feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel under No More Night Media. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you next time.